Welcome back to Safas Unscripted. We got Breva, no Brett today. He's actually, as we are speaking, on a flight on his way back to Cape Town. We got an interesting topic. We switched it around a bit. We used to do Fun Fridays, but we've got such an interesting topic that's taking the rugby world by storm at the moment. We've got the Club Rugby World Cup. Now, before we get into it, the channel is growing amazingly, and we can't thank you guys enough for it. Whether you hate us or whether you love us, we appreciate each and every one of you guys. Keep the band up, keep the love and support up. We appreciate you. Remember to hit that like and subscribe button. Brevan, Club Rugby World Cup. Now, I know a bit more of you going into this blindly. Just pure Club Rugby World Cup. Take it as on face value, yay or nay.
I'm actually very 50-50 on it, as I need to hear more about it, but I just feel like the schedule at the moment is already so, packed. And, if we look at the Bulls, for example, they were in Ireland and they had to travel back to play Lyon at Loftus. Now they're going back to the UK to play the Northampton Saints. Now they have to come back to play Munster. It's a schedule of crazy, crazy stuff. So I need to hear more about this. Obviously, it's been a crazy busy day. Haven't heard much about this. Haven't read anything yet. So, yeah, explain more to me, and that will basically get my thoughts up and down about this.
Yeah, so obviously with anything, I agree with a lot of the processing of it, but I also disagree with a lot of it. So just to cover some of the basics, right? They want to hold this Club Rugby World Cup every 4 years. I like the fact that it's a 4-year thing. It makes it a rare commodity. That's what makes a World Cup in any form of sport so beautiful. Even the Olympics, the fact that you don't get it that much, so you appreciate it for when it's here. So I'm glad it's not a 2 years, every 2 years, every year thing. It's they're going to have it in 2028, and then so it's going to be after the World Cup. Now that's where my first point of disagreement comes in, and we'll go through the topics of it all. I want it as the year before the World Cup. So in this instance, I would have appreciated it more if it was for 2026, just because I think after the World Cup, everyone kind of wants a break. You don't kind of want to psych yourself up for the Club World Cup again. I think the Club World Cup kind of prepares you for the massive international World Cup the year after. That's why I would want it rather to be played the year before the Rugby World Cup to build the hype for that. Obviously, everyone wants to perform and get into that international team. And what better way to get into that international team than with the Club World Cup? So just your opinion on the every 4 years and the fact that it is after the World Cup.
I think every 4 years is fair. I think it's, you don't want to play this every single year or make it something like, for instance, as we all know, like if we look at an under-20s World Cup, it's all played basically, if I'm correct, every year or every 2 years. You can educate me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that almost, obviously that's for youngsters, but I think for clubs, I think you kind of want to make it something special because, like you say, when you win a World Cup, it only comes around every 4 years. Also, like a Lions tour every 4 years, that's what makes it so special. So I think I agree with the fact that it should be every 4 years. But then, like, I'm completely agreeing with you in the sense that having it the year after the World Cup, players are kind of full of, they don't really want to psych themselves up again because it's such a big thing to win.
Look how long it took for some of the World Cup players after the previous World Cup now to even come back. Frans Malherbe playing only his second game, actually his first game, because he played off the bench both games after the World Cup. Now I know it took a long time to come back, but that just kind of enforces your point. Like it's tough to go back after the World Cup because obviously this format is a lot shorter than the World Cup, which we'll get into. But yeah, that just reinforces your point.
Yeah, I mean, another thing is, I think having it a year before, I can get behind as well. But even if it's like 2 years before the World Cup, even then, it leaves a bit of space because I can imagine a Club World Cup is going to be something that players will play their hearts out for. I can just imagine that's the case. And with that, naturally, injuries may occur. And what kind of worries me if it's a year before the World Cup is if it's such a serious injury, it could kind of rule a player out. But then again, that's just the nature of rugby in any tournament that can happen. So I think having it 2 or 1 year before, I think that would make a lot more sense. than having it a year after. Because just naturally, any rugby player, after they've gone through such a difficult preparation and having to play the World Cup, these guys, they want a bit of, like, as much as everyone wants to win the URC, everyone wants to win the Champions Cup. At the same time, you don't take it as seriously as you take it when you play in a World Cup. So, you kind of just feel like you want a bit of mental break from having such a serious preparation. So, yeah, I think having it
Yeah,
a year
of
after.
course, especially in all this in this day and age where we talk about mental, or not even mental, just like welfare of the players, right? You can't put them into these big competitions the whole time, every single year, and expect them to put their bodies on the line. Like at some point, they need a break. And as you mentioned before, the season already is very tough. Now, obviously, they will adjust to the seasons. For instance, in South Africa, where we already play one tournament more in in terms of the Curry Cup, we already play youngsters there. So I don't see. Um, I think we'll just bring in more of the youngsters that plays in the Curry Cup and put them in URC teams, for instance, if it has to come to that. Obviously, they'll work out the scheduling that it doesn't overlap with the international games. I think they might shorten the normal season, or however they approach it. I'm sure they'll figure it out. But I like the idea of it, because we always talk about the North versus the South, and we got the International World Cup, obviously the biggest trophy in our sport. But to have it for club rugby as well is massive, in my opinion. I truly do appreciate it. Now, going on to the next point, and this is where I had a bit more disagreement. So the way they want to decide the teams to participate in this World Cup is they want to take the top 6 of the Super Rugby, the top 8 of the Champions Cup, and then 2 Japanese teams. Now, I'll let you go first, and then I'll tell you why I disagree with this pretty heavily.
Yeah, look, I can already see where you're going with this. I completely disagree as well. If we look at why, like Champions Cup, I can somewhat agree. I think maybe taking from the Champions Cup top 8, those are your respective teams that will represent. Or alternatively, have it a different way. Have it where you have cut the amount, but have it from the URC and the Prem, and top 14. But I think when it comes to Super Rugby, and this is where I can see a bit of what we might agree on. Um, how many teams are in Super Rugby? If you can just
You
imagine.
literally taking exactly my point. Yeah, 6.
Um, there's only, yeah. Well, the thing
Oh,
is, like,
they're taking 6, and there's 12
mm,
teams.
that's the thing, right? So sixth place in this in Super Rugby, what we can call it, like a Reds, or maybe a Western Force or something. Imagine a team like that going to play against Leinster in wherever they play. I think it will be easily 50, 60, 70. Like, I genuinely believe that's how bad it will be, purely because I don't think the Super Rugby teams are getting any other exposure other than themselves. And also, just taking sixth place in Super Rugby, it's not going to make sense. Like, you're competing against the best in Europe and in South Africa, against sixth best in a continent, or two continents, or not continents, sorry, two countries or three countries. So, yeah, look, it's that is where I'm kind of like, 6 Super Rugby teams. Are you serious? Like, yeah, I think you can go now.
Yeah, so you went a bit more in depth with it. My objection is more towards the other side. Like, I agree, taking 6 teams from the Super Rugby, I think, is a bit ridiculous, because you're taking half their league. That's the whole issue with it. And the other issue is it's 2 different formats. You're talking about the Champions Cup and the Super Rugby, but it's not the same format. The Champions Cup is a knockout tournament. So you get the luck of the draw. You don't play everyone. So you can have, for instance, look at the Stormers this year. So we didn't make top 8 because we didn't go to the quarterfinals, obviously, but we played against the 2-time defending champions. We're on the other side of the draw, and we were in the group of death. If we went on past this round, if we somehow beat La Rochelle, we would have played against Leinster, and most likely would have lost. It's at the Aviva. Leinster is a very strong team, probably the best in Europe, along with Toulouse. Well, on the other side, you have the likes of Racing 92, for instance, or Saracens, who's been battered all season. So it's the luck of the draw. Where I feel the better way to do it is, as you mentioned, I would go, the Japanese teams aren't going to compete. Okay. Let's not be stupid or idiotic. Okay. I respect getting everyone involved, but this is not a charity case. This is the World Cup. Okay. So I'll go 4 teams of each. I'd go 4 teams from the Prem, 4 teams from the URC, 4 teams from top 14, and then 4 teams from um, the Super Rugby. That gives you 16. They want 16 teams in the World Cup. It just makes more sense to me in my brain, because then you're taking the top 14 teams from the leagues. Obviously, everyone ends in knockouts. So everyone has semifinals and a final. So you don't care too much about that. If you make the playoffs there, you get into the World Cup, which is fair enough. There's no luck of the draw because you have to play everyone. I just feel personally that makes a lot more sense. If you want to have charity cases, then put in 2 teams of Japan, put in a team of, I don't know, some dweebs from Georgia or whatever you want to do. Okay. It just feels in my mind like that makes more sense than the way that they want to do it, because the Champions Cup's already five nations combined. So you will get a spot where it's like some of the nations doesn't even get represented. So just like it's stupid in my opinion. I'd rather go it with the league format, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, it's also tough because, like, for instance, and this isn't an excuse. I mean, it's just something that comes to mind. As we all know, a lot of South African players do tend to go overseas for pay, and it's natural, and that kind of it decreases our depth in what we have in our teams, and it's a massive issue I see with the Bulls as well. As much as our starting lineup is fantastic, and I think they're one of the best in the world on the day, I just think the depth comes it comes flat after that. And as we all know, like if it's a Club World Cup and a bunch of Springboks have just played for the Springboks, and then obviously they have to take a break for their club, then we have no depth, and obviously, that's an issue. It might cause us to maybe not be involved in this Club World Cup, and it's the same for every other nation as well. But yeah, I think there's always going to be disagreements on how they want to form this World Cup. But I think we can both agree, just the way they're thinking of doing it doesn't make sense, because you're taking 6 teams from a league, but then you're taking 8 teams from the whole of Europe, and maybe 1 or 2 from South Africa. So it doesn't make sense, because I mean, you're combining eight of the best in Europe, and we're going to include South Africa in that bunch because we play in Europe, and then you're taking the 6 best of Australia, New Zealand, and let's be honest, probably not Fiji and Samoa, but maybe. But yeah, I think it doesn't make sense, because I genuinely don't see like a 6th place in Super Rugby being able to compete in a tournament like that. Whereas the 8 best in Champions Cup makes a whole lot of sense. And like, I don't mind seeing the Japanese teams as well, but they need to be able to compete. Like, I don't want this to be like this Leinster, or like, fair play, they are strong and they'll probably be B favourites for like a Club World Cup, but we don't want to see Leinster get put in a pool with like Moana Pacifica, I don't know, the Reds. Like, it would be horrific to watch that. But anyway, I think that's where they need to kind of think more about how they want to structure this, because we want it to be competitive. We want teams to play against the best, whereas I don't see 6th place in Super Rugby being the best. And yeah, that's just my opinion on that.
As I said, we can literally make it 4 of each, and then you can have a couple of extras in there. Throw in 2 Japanese teams. Throw in what's that Argentinian team that always did well?
Yeah. Jaguars.
The Jaguars. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then that Georgian team, right? There's 20 teams for you. You can make pools of 5, for instance, 4 pools of 5, and then you have your semifinals and you have your final. That is just the way that I would approach it. Obviously, the fact that we are critiquing it means that we are keen for it. I'm very keen for it. You want to see who's the best, right? That's always the thing. You play to see who is the best. There's always the debate here. For instance, Saracens won or Leinster won the Champions Cup, and Crusaders have won the Super Rugby. But who's the best, right? And then they play one game randomly, like Munster played the Crusaders, but it's the
Yeah,
start
but
of the Crusaders season. It's in the middle of the Munster season, so the chemistry on both teams differ so much. But overall, I think it's a really interesting thing. I would love it. I do agree with you that we can have it in the middle of the World Cups. I think that's probably the best thing. And I just like the fact that it's not every year. There was another topic that I kind of wanted to bring up, but I kind of forgot as well. I think this could be massive uh, out of a South African perspective to get some of our boys back in our country. Obviously, when we have tournaments outside South Africa, you look at the URC, you look at the Champions Cup. If you have a Club World Cup, like the financial backing that the South African teams will get could motivate a lot of our players to actually stay in South Africa and keep our boys here. This will motivate them to play for our franchises and represent our jerseys. Um, I think this could be massive for us in terms of finance for our rugby players because everyone wants to make the money move. It could be the money move for the South Africans to stay in South Africa, and that's kind of what we want.
yeah, and the thing is, like, even if we can't offer what a let's put it a Toulouse or a Leinster, Munster can offer, if we can offer more than what we currently are, I don't see this being the same as football slash soccer, whatever you want to call it, because I feel like rugby is a game that yes, money is important, but what really matters to you is representing a side that means something to you, like really means something to you. And that's why I believe if there was a bit more financial backing, like in the South African franchises, a lot of players would still be here, because rugby is a sport you can't play. Like, yes, money is important, but like, you don't go on the field to sacrifice your body, for even, and money is important, like I said, but you do that because it comes from something inside of you. And a lot of people, as much as South Africa has their issues, this country is amazing in so many ways, and I believe so many people would love to stay here. And that's why I believe, like, if this can happen and financial backing comes, it will bring a lot of South African players back to play for the Bulls, Stormers, Lions, Sharks, whoever it may be. And it will be good for the game because I think the stadiums will become fuller. And yes, a lot of people have been arguing that South Africa doesn't fill up their stadiums, but at the same time, there are reasons behind this. Like, I saw you guys explain that in the last pod, and people don't realize schoolboy rugby in South Africa is a massive thing. And when you have the biggest Pretoria derby going on at the same time the Bulls are playing, you kind of think, yeah, the Bulls are going to beat Leon. Let me go watch, this massive Pretoria derby between Affies and Garsfontein. So, yeah, I think at the end of the day, more financial backing definitely brings more players back here, and that's what we need. I think the more stars in South Africa, the better, the more money we as fans will pump into the teams as well, buying
Yeah.
merchandise, going to
I mean,
games, and
just
that's
think
just the
about the
thing.
nostalgia of South African teams playing against their Super Rugby rivals again. Like,
Mm.
think about prime Lions versus the Crusaders, or the Stormers and the Bulls versus Crusaders again. That is nostalgia. That is what we grew up with. Those stadiums will be packed. We've got
Mm.
all the New Zealanders in the world, New Zealand supporters, I should rather say, in South Africa. It's literally like a second home. For New Zealanders to come here. And I know a lot of people have the question on their minds in terms of, does this take away from the domestic leagues, right? Like the top 14, like the Prem, like the URC. I don't think it does at all. I think it actually embraces it and makes it so much better because now and it creates squad depth, right? So now, excuse me, those teams are forced to go out and get more youngsters, right? Because they need to manage their players. And this is not every year. So it's every fourth year that they have to manage their players, for instance. So they get a lot more opportunity for youngsters to come through. Yeah, it might be a bit of a housery during that year. a lot of playing time, but I don't think you play your big name players if you are South African even a single game in the Curry Cup. You give it makes it a more even playing field for the likes of, for instance, the Lions will embrace it because they don't really stand a chance to go and play in the Club World Cup. I'm not writing them off, but I'm just talking from where they are at the moment. Makes them more competitive in the URC because you can't put your full strength team out for the URC because you've got a Club World Cup coming up. That is if the seasons overlap and stuff. Now I know people could also say, listen, they got to get the seasons right, but that's also where they talk about like it's going to be played just in the north. It's not going to be travel up and down, up and down, up and down. So the same as the World Cup, it's being played in
Okay.
one single country. So in the Club World Cup will be played in the north, and then the next one will be played in the south, and it's only in the north and only in the south. There's never switching around, which
Yeah.
is a brilliant idea. So just to wrap up the show, what is your final thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask is what was their plans going with venues and places? Was it going to be travel from South Africa to England to New Zealand? If that was the case, I think it's a joke. I think that would never work. But if it is in a country, just one sole, even if it's in, let's say, a dual hosted, so let's say Ireland and England hosted together, like that, I don't mind either.
Just
Um,
to add, for some info to you, it's also not a long thing. It's not going to be like the World Cup that stretches over 2 months, for instance. I think it's altogether. I think it's straight away knockouts, or you have pool stages and then you go into your knockouts. But there's just 16 teams, so it
okay.
is so quick. I think it might altogether go on for a month, maybe a bit more than a month, but it doesn't take forever because you don't have these rookie teams that just like a Namibia that just fills some gaps.
Mm. I think a 6 week period would be fantastic. I think, a game every week. So if there's 16 teams, there's four in a pool. You play 3 weeks, three pool games, and then three knockouts each. So 6 weeks, I'd genuinely be like, that's cool. 1.5 months, I think that's great. But yeah, I think the only thing is like, what would you do? You think that you would get the likes of New Zealanders, South Africans, Australians to travel to watch their club all the way to what do you think they would get behind it and fly to Europe to watch, to fill out
Well,
stadiums?
it's tough to say, right? Because we haven't seen it before. So I think you will get some of those people that really travel. Depends on the backing that the tournament gets. If the tournament gets backed properly by World Rugby, like a Rugby World Cup does, I can see the people traveling because it will be the second biggest tournament in rugby. So obviously you will go to support your team, but it won't be, for instance, it's different supporting your country, right? The whole nation gets together and everyone from the nation goes over and they support. Where it's just a certain team. But I think with the way that the world is at the moment, with foreigners literally all over the place, you will get your backing, and that's kind of the thing with you have to play against the crowd. It's the same with what you do in a World Cup. You play against, for instance, South Africa versus France. Yeah, there was a couple of South Africans, but we were shut down by the French supporters, and it's going to be the same for this thing. I think they still make it work. You can doubt it, but the people still come out for the big tournaments. Even if I wasn't even if the Stormers didn't play and it was randomly the Bulls versus the Crusaders at Newlands or at Greenpoint Stadium now, I would go out and watch it because it's a massive, massive game. Because you're a rugby supporter and you're going to support whoever's playing in your country. Um,
Mm.
so I'd be a Bull supporter for that day. And I think that would be the same even if it's in the Northern Hemisphere. There's a lot of New Zealanders out there in Ireland and England. Same with South Africans out there. There's a lot of them on this side of the world. So I don't doubt that the stadiums won't get filled up. I think you will struggle to get tickets. I think it could be a
Mm.
massive, massive thing. So I wouldn't really doubt the financial aspect and the support aspect of it. I think the most objection to it will probably be the schedule on the guys' bodies. Um, but I would love for our boys to say, listen, we don't go to Japan. We're staying in South Africa because we want to participate in tournaments like this. Because that
Mm.
is what rugby guys do. They want to win a World Cup. They want to be the best team. Imagine you can be the best country in the world and in the best franchise team in the world. Like that is a dream, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, like you said, if it is hosted in South Africa, for instance, I'd love to go watch a Crusaders versus Leinster game or a Chiefs versus Leinster game. I think that would be absolutely fantastic to watch. Um, I think if we just look at and then we'll wrap up the pod now, but I think if we look at teams right now and the way they're structured, I think it would be great to see the likes of a Chiefs. Crusaders obviously aren't the same, but we'll use them as an example because of how dominant they've been. Um, those teams going to play against Leinster, going to play against Toulouse, I think you'll see some of the best rugby we've ever seen because I
Yeah.
think it's amazing to see like a Toulouse versus a Crusaders. Like imagine how big that actually is if you actually think about it. So
Even if it's
yeah,
just two New Zealand teams, people watch it from all over the world. I'm sure there's a lot of people that, like, for instance, live in England and it's their dream to watch the Crusaders, but the Crusaders never play outside of the Super Rugby. They're not even a Crusaders fan. They just, if they had to choose a team from the Super Rugby, they choose the Crusaders, but they are a Saracens fan. They would still love to see the Crusaders take on the Chiefs in England. Like
mm,
that is the whole thing. Even this game that we're playing against Wales in England, South Africa versus Wales in July, you can't tell me that stadium's not still going to be packed. It's not
yeah,
either one of our countries playing, but that's the thing. Like when it comes to sport, you have support from all over the world, and that is so. I have no doubt that this will still be massive. I'm very glad they finally. It's not just an idea. They came out with the news that it's already confirmed or it's signed between the European teams and the Southern Hemisphere teams, or the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere. It's just Japan that still has to sign off. But I think there's a couple of fixes that they could still make in terms of how they choose the teams and stuff like that.
mm,
But that is the end of the episode. Briavan, thank you very much for joining us. As always, not joining us. Thank you for always being here. We've got Brett. He will be back for the next episode. As we said, he's just in Cape Town. He's on his way. He's on a flight. Hope he's got a safe flight. We will see you guys next time. Thank you very much for your love and support as always, and we will see you next time. Bye.
cheers.